So today I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Max from Duolingo. I'll let each one introduce themselves here in a minute. We have Tiffany from Instructure, and we have Jeff from Ticketmaster. So Max, why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I'm Max. I work in our infrastructure platform area. I've been with Duolingo for over a decade now. I managed IT, security, and cloud ops for a good 5 years, and I'm back to now being an individual contributor as an engineer. And I work on mostly projects that span all of engineering. We're trying to build a nice integrated platform for all of our engineers. And it's a continuous process like FinOps, and we're trying to integrate a lot of cost reduction tools, as well as all the other nice tooling that we have, so that developing applications for our platform are nice and easy.
Tiffany?
I'm Tiffany Taggert. I'm the Senior FinOps Manager at Instructure. Most people don't know what Instructure is, but if I say our flagship product is Canvas and we're in education, that happens. I've been with Instructure for about 3.5 years, and I've been doing FinOps related work for about 7 years. My history was actually heavily based in accounting, and that was kind of driving me crazy, and so I switched over to finance, and I kind of fell into a traditional FP&A team supporting engineering departments, managing their cloud hosting costs, and I actually knew nothing about cloud hosting when I started doing that, so the ramp was a little bit violent for me in the beginning, but it was also very intriguing, and so I just couldn't let go. And my role at Instructure, this is the first time I'm actually rolling up and embedded in the engineering department, which I like a lot more than being on a finance team. And the role was created after the pandemic because that had a really big impact on Instructure, and that our usage of our application, being in education, just suddenly tripled that year. And so our flagship product, Canvas, was actually born in the cloud, and so our engineers were kind of uniquely capable of managing their costs really well up to that point, and then things just spiraled out of control and they were trying to keep up, and they kind of came to the end of it and went, oh wow, our spend is super material now, and we need somebody to come in and handle our forecast and start managing this and working with our teams and everything. So that's when I came in, and I've been establishing the FinOps practice there, and just working all the different domains and capabilities. We're crawling, walking, and running, depending on what we're talking about there, and yeah.
And Jeff?
Hey, I'm Jeff from Ticketmaster. I've been with Ticketmaster since 2019 when they started to really move a lot of stuff into the cloud. I've been in the domain of cloud cost optimization for over a decade. Came to this conference last year for the first time, so good, came back. But started adopting FinOps, I guess, a couple years ago in the early phases.
Awesome. Let's start with the questions. So I come from an engineering background, and I started playing in the cloud back in 2007 actually. And I had to do all the cloud billing. So when I would get an invoice, I had to sit there and do it by hand and figure out what department was going to pay. So it's been interesting to watch how FinOps has changed, and now has become a profession. So with that, my first question for the panel is, how did you end up in FinOps? Tiffany, you went a little through it, but we can talk to Max and Jeff. And how did you end up in FinOps, and how has it changed since you started to where we are now in 2024?
I can start.
Yeah.
So I was on a cloud architecture team at a previous enterprise. They'd just gone through the exercise of migrating a lot of stuff into the cloud, and then started to look at the bill and realized they needed to get some controls on that. So kind of fell into the role of helping them look at those costs, visibility part of it, and then optimizing them. And then doing the same thing for Ticketmaster. And then FinOps came along and really helped validate, organize and define that process, that provide a tangible roadmap that made it a lot easier to point us in the right direction on what we were doing, help us gain maturity in the space. That's pretty much how we got there.
Interesting. Max?
Yeah, I think in my career, I've always been an operationally minded person. So all of us are saying, like, I did DevOps before DevOps. That was true. We did FinOps before FinOps was named. But really, like, I'm all about optimization, whether that's cost or performance or, usability optimization is something like people don't think about. Like, how long does it take you to do like a pretty simple task or something you do every day? So I kind of think of these things holistically. And when I first came in to Duolingo, like the company was still fairly small, like 20 people. I thought they had done a pretty great job with their infrastructure, having so few people. And I had zero cloud experience. I always like to state this. Like, I managed physical data centers before I came to Duolingo, so this thing was very foreign to me. And there were like no cost controls early on. We're a startup, we're like grow, cost doesn't matter, money coming in doesn't matter, revenue doesn't matter. So the first things we were doing were kind of like optimizations around usage. So at first we just had a static amount of instances. So like, what's the next step? You start doing auto scaling so that you go with the traffic spikes and valleys. So that's the first thing that we did, and then it just kind of grew from there. So like the next major thing we did was like Spot instances. And once you get to a certain size, like, as the bill increases in magnitude, you actually start caring about the cost controls. And it was very, very gradual, I think, over time, up until like our point of sophistication today. Yeah.
And Tiffany?
I mean, I think the biggest change for me is, I started in this line of work about 7 years ago, and the name FinOps, it wasn't something passed around. I think the first position that I held doing this type of work, you mentioned DevOps, they joked around and called me FinOps, and we just thought that was funny, and now it's actually real. And it was like I was trying to do that work in those early positions, but there wasn't really any guidance or framework to follow at that time, and organizations were like not really focused on it. And so a big change for me was this position at Instructure. They were specifically looking for a FinOps person to implement a FinOps practice, and I thought that's some great progress in and of itself, that's being recognized, and found the foundation early on when I joined Instructure, and we reached out to them, and it was funny, it was JR responded to us and got on a call with us, and now today you look at how it's grown and the support and the resources and everything. That's the biggest change for me.
That's a good point when we talk about how it's changed. As FinOps evolves and your practices have evolved, how has your team grown? Are you still teams of one, or do you guys is FinOps an actual like job title and you have a department? How are you guys structured?
So we're looking to get there. I can call myself a team of one, but I work in a hugely collaborative environment and have great partners in finance, cloud operations, global support, our technology and strategy team. So everyone's kind of involved. But yeah, we definitely look to formalize that a little bit over the next year or so.
Max?
Yeah, we are looking at building out a team specifically for cloud costs. We essentially have like one FTE. It's like split between myself and my other colleague who's actually presenting right at this exact same slot right now. Yeah, we kind of share the load there, but we have a lot of additional responsibilities, so this is not our core focus. So we are looking to like staff a team of probably like 2 to 3 people, probably within the next 6 months to a year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then how is Instructure structured? That's a weird question, way to ask that question, but how do you guys structure your FinOps practice?
So the last 3 years, it's just been me, basically, and obviously I have a team of collaborative people from engineering and finance and everything, and we all meet regularly. But the great news for me is that 3 weeks ago, I got a FinOps analyst, so now I am a team of 2. So that is some amazing progress for us. That's basically how we're structured.
So what I'm taking away is we have 3 different companies in 3 different spaces, sort of. I mean, Duolingo is an education company at the end of the day, but you guys all have different ways of approaching FinOps organizationally. Is that accurate?
Fair.
All right. So let's talk about efficiency, because efficiency is more than the dollars and cents. If we're looking at it from an engineering perspective, it comes down to how has FinOps changed your products? And I'll start with you, Max.
How's it change the products? Yeah, I mean, I really look at this as kind of a reliability trade-off in a way, because a lot of the cost savings measures do impact reliability if you go a little bit too far. So if you bring, memory and CPU usage like right up to the limit, and then, it runs out of memory and your service goes down, like you have to be very aware of that. So what we've done is we've kind of established like sane defaults, not even thinking about like cloud costs for like, okay, well, 80% of capacity of memory seems like a pretty good threshold for everyone. But we have seen teams like tune it a little too far and like, hey, you should really back off of this. Us going down is going to cost more money than, what you're going to spend on that little tiny tweak. But we've also seen like a lot of innovation within teams. Like I saw recently a team slightly tune their auto scaling parameters, past the defaults, and they saved like 30%. And I was amazed, like a 10% difference one way or the other. So we do see, like, if you provide the hooks for teams to make these modifications, sometimes you're surprised. And then we also have to look at things like at the base level, our clusters of instances, or we have like a lot of Spot instances and RIs, and we manage those centrally. But on top of that, like each team is managing their own services, on top of that. And we have hundreds of services now, so we can't possibly tweak every single one centrally, and they're also like changing constantly, and we're getting new services coming in. So I kind of look at that level where like the teams manage certain parts, and then centrally we manage like the full resources underneath.
Interesting. Ticketmaster has a very interesting infrastructure story because of noted events, but both good and bad. How does FinOps play into your infrastructure and your product?
So yeah, that business model, we definitely look a lot at elasticity. We have to respond to big events, obviously. I don't know that we directly influence the product on the business side, but we definitely influence, we try to influence how they're architected, and that, the tremendous growth we're enjoying, that results in cloud growth is responsible growth.
Right.
And they're running as efficiently as possible with attention to reliability and security and all the other fun aspects of the business.
And what about Instructure? Instructure's use case is really interesting because so many schools, so many education institutions depend on your flagship product. How do you handle that scaling and balance FinOps?
Yeah, so not being as technical, I think one of the way FinOps has really impacted our products, like early on, a very classic easy win that we were able to deliver was implementing a platform for visibility and to be able to explore and analyze our costs and do custom mappings. And so for the first time ever, we were actually able to give teams the costs of their products. Like they were actually able to see that for the first time ever, which was hugely impactful. With that customization that we were able to do in that platform, we were able to get anomaly detection. And so for the first time ever, someone was coming to them and saying specifically, hey, your costs are spiking here. And they were like, how do you even know that's our cost? They thought FinOps was some sort of black magic happening to them. But yeah, getting those costs for our products and services for the first time really impacted because they were like, oh, we didn't realize we were even spending that, or we needed to shut that down and we forgot. And the platform also enabled us to kind of allocate our costs according to our forecasting methodology. So we were able to get a lot more granular, and when we had spikes in our costs, we were able to drill in specifically and go to a team and address it very quickly, which has just made us be a lot more efficient. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that impacted our products, is just giving them that information and being able to action on it very quickly.
That's a great point that I think a lot of the engineering teams and people who run engineering, they think FinOps is just these magic computers that we can spin up in the cloud. I don't have to go to my CTO and buy request a server like I did previously. I can just go spin it up in the cloud. And so having insight into those costs really helps engineers visualize it. You're going to notice that we're using some nautical themes as we were putting this together. So how do we avoid mutiny when we're in San Diego? We've got a big naval station. We had to do it. How did you get buy-in from your organizations? You come to them and say, hey, we're going to put guardrails around your costs, and we're going to start tracking costs. How did you avoid people going, nope, you're not. I'm going to do what I want. And I'll start with you, Jeff.
Well, looking at the phases in FinOps, the first phase is inform.
Right.
And just showing people what those costs are is pretty powerful mechanism for doing that and getting them on board. I also appreciate that FinOps has kind of made formal the framework for doing this, because it's not just about me telling them about cost optimization and why. We have validation from the FinOps organization, and that really helps to negotiate for what's right, if, with the backing of a community and an organization defining this stuff for us.
Tiffany?
Yeah, I think I've been really lucky at Instructure. It's kind of been magical, because I wouldn't even put Mutiny into any description of my interaction with it. Yeah, like everyone has been very receptive, just kind of delivering those early wins like I spoke about early on, like, oh, that's what my product is costing, and oh, I didn't realize I had this anomaly happening. But I think being a finance person in an engineering world, I've had to find unique ways of interacting with engineers. I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage a lot of time when they're talking, and so I use a lot of humor to engage them. I ask them to treat me like a kindergartner when they're describing things that are technical, or give me the pop-up book version, and I think just having maybe that humility with them it just engages them a lot better. But I think everyone was really ready for it at Instructure, and the leadership was already on board when I got there. They were ready to have me, so it's been an easy ride, honestly, for me.
That's a good point, because as an IT guy, or as an engineer, accounting has always been the black hole for me. And so I have to be the guy that goes in and explain your accounting stuff to me like I'm 5, right? Because I don't understand amortization and writing things off. And so I think we put ourselves in that same vulnerable position and that fosters that collaboration. Have you guys seen that to be true? That trade-off in technical capabilities makes it so that everybody's on the same level?
Yeah, I think translating that for the organization is definitely important. A lot of what we do is data analysis. We're looking at detailed cost and usage reports from different vendors, and trying to translate that into growth drivers, forecasts, budgets, you name it. So yeah, absolutely.
Let's go to the next one. Navigating errors. Looking back, retrospective. You've been on your FinOps journey for a while. We were in different areas at 3 different companies. What do you wish that you had known when you started, or what would you do differently now that you're sitting on a stage telling people what you would do differently? And I'll start with you, Tiffany.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did early on when I came on board, as you should, is, kind of lay out that roadmap and, start educating and informing everyone about what you're going to do and why, to kind of get that buy-in. And we did that in extreme. Speaking of a nautical theme, we actually called it our FinOps Treasure Map. There was a literal map where each of the different milestones was drinking grog and whatnot, but it was very elaborate. It had parts for exploration and analysis and statistical calculations and forecasting, and it was like this whole journey that our teams were supposed to go on to shift left, and it ended up being much too elaborate and complicated at the end of the day, and hard to implement. And as priorities and directions changed within the organization, things inside of that fell flat, and we had to go a different way. And we implemented new versions of applications we were going to use, so we had to scrap work that we had done and start over. And so at the end of the day, I wish I would have realized then that more collaborative approach between FinOps and the teams, especially early on as you're having them absorb this work, is is key. Like, it was just unrealistic to think that we could just hand them this guide that was so complicated and elaborate and expect them to just absorb all of that work and we would just wash our hands of it. And so, yeah, for me, that was kind of the early error. A lot of time and effort spent there, and now I'm just kind of going for that collaborative approach, which is much more successful at Instructure.
Interesting. What about at Ticketmaster?
I think, we had a lot of focus early on pre-FinOps, where we're looking at costs and reacting to them and innovating as we go, solving problems, more, reactive approach to cost optimization. But a lot of focus on the first couple of phases, inform, where we're making things visible, we're prioritizing low-hanging fruit. A lot of attention to that. I think going back, I would force myself to spend more time on the operate phase, make sure it's incorporated so that we're spending time and resources on integrating process with development teams and automation, just so that the whole process scales, eventually, because you can get caught in the inform and optimize, loop, and then it makes it impossible to scale and do better.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Like, you've got so much data, you don't know what to do with
yeah.
it. What about Duolingo? What would you do differently at Duolingo?
Yeah, I have two main ones. So definitely like carrots, not sticks. I'm saying this a lot these days. This especially applies to things like security, of course, like that's the most obvious one, but it can also apply to any sort of financial controls. But yeah, provide incentives. Like, don't force it and say you must do X by X date. We learned that lesson pretty hard, I would say, around some like security and compliance measures. Incentives work much, much better. And we also have grown to the point where we have like infrastructure teams in certain areas of the company, which is very helpful, as opposed to like we used to have just a central infrastructure team. So now those areas are incentivized to save costs and improve performance and security and all those sorts of things as well. And another like technical thing I would definitely correct, if I could go back in time, our initial versions of like our cost showback dashboards, we found out much later that they were not as accurate as they should have been. And of course, engineers are naturally skeptical. I'm skeptical. Some people found some math errors, and at that point, like, everyone stopped trusting those dashboards. And like, we had to move to a completely new platform and like verify the numbers very heavily to the point where we gained that trust back. So make sure the math's correct.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm going to ask one more question that isn't on the slides because you brought it up. How does security, because we've seen, how does security of your cloud infrastructure impact your FinOps practice? And I know that we didn't practice this one, but you brought it up, and so I wanted to ask it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to how many protections you have, especially at the edge, like web application firewalls, any sort of DDoS protection, and like packet inspection. This stuff is super expensive, at the end of the day. So it's a trade-off, like anything else. You just have to, talk to legal, talk to finance. What sort of regulations do you have to comply with? You have to kind of weigh all that stuff, but of course, you can't like throw half your bill at security.
Right,
That's
which is
probably not the best.
Which is what a lot of people try to do when it comes to cloud security. If I throw more money at it, it's going to be more secure, which isn't always the case.
Maybe if you're there with federal government or.
What about Ticketmaster? How do your security posture impact your FinOps practice, or vice versa?
Well, security is expensive, and so it's more costs, when it's using cloud services or, that are security aware. Tracking those, managing those, making sure they're being applied correctly. It's just another area for responsible cloud growth to look at. But security is interesting. The processes for the implementation of security are similar to the processes for the implementation of cost optimization, insofar as you've got governance, you're kind of evangelizing, what the right thing to do is with your development teams, and tracking progress, anomalies, anything else. So again, it's an expense that needs to be tracked and managed.
Do you handle that expense tracking the same way that you do the rest of your cloud operations? Do you use FinOps practices to kind of guide how you do your cloud security?
Within the cloud security themselves, it's a different team, so they're doing their thing, but it's more about like watching the trends.
Got it.
And the growth in that and justifying the spend, we're looking for offsets in that spend where there might be good offsets for that, but otherwise it's similar.
Interesting. And what about, do you have anything that you want to add, Tiffany?
Yeah, technically speaking, I don't really have a lot to offer there, but it was interesting in JR's keynote this morning because I was relating to the fact that I've kind of started picking up work around security and working with that team. They just moved our whole security team at Instructure into the same group that I'm in, and I'm starting to work with them on monitoring and managing their costs and everything. So I'm getting into it now.
So you're moving, so Instructure is taking infrastructure and security at the same priority and using those same practices. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And very forward thinking.
We try.
So the next 12 months, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to get into the focus framework and how that'll impact your multi-cloud operations. I think all three of you guys are multi-cloud. Or you're not.
No?
But Duolingo and Ticketmaster are.
Yeah.
Is focus going to change how you approach FinOps, or is it going to help?
I think it's going to help, especially as we expand into total cost of ownership for our applications beyond cloud into SaaS tools, on-prem, those kind of things. Standardizing that data model or schema for the cost and usage reports, I think, will be huge in helping us achieve that.
And what else is on your radar for the next 12, 18 months at Ticketmaster?
That's a big part of it. Is we want to be able to show and manage costs across all the products that are being used, all our technology costs in general. We want to get better at forecasting, based on unit economics, the trends and other drivers for those forecasts that we just saw in the keynote explained by Disney, I think. But forecasting, budgets, unit economics, and then total cost of ownership.
Interesting. What about you, Tiffany?
Well, as I mentioned, we have now another person on the team, so I expect that we're going to make tons of progress in the next 12 to 18 months. Really going to be just pushing processes and collaboration with the specific product teams, getting them that detailed information, working with them on managing their costs, like digging into what they're using, seeing if there's efficiency and optimization to be had there. And my favorite, working on forecasts with them. I love a good forecast in a spreadsheet, so I see a lot of those in my future. But yeah, I just imagine that we're really going to be able to accelerate and to run on a lot of the different capabilities.
That's awesome. What about Duolingo? What's on your radar?
Yeah, so I mentioned we're very likely to establish a dedicated team, so that's going to help a lot with these things. But we're also looking at area level forecasts. So the way we have our team structured, we have, I don't know, maybe dozens of services in an area, and each team might manage like 3 to 4 of those. We have all the costs broken down at that level, but now we need to group them into teams, areas, and then work with those areas on doing individual forecasts. And then probably the trickiest part is putting those all together to make sure that the numbers actually line up at the top level. Because we do have a top-line forecast for the next couple of years. And the way we kind of create units for the cloud costs is we look at like cost per daily active user. So that trend line is like very consistent, but how do you actually break it apart and get all the way down to the service level? And then from the service level to the actual bill, like I think that's a pretty interesting problem.
That's a great point. I'd like to thank my panelists. We have a few minutes for questions for anybody that has some questions for any one of us on the panel. We've got a mic that's going to be coming around. And so if you have questions.
I'll start here and then jump over to the other.
Perfect.
Nice and loud right into that.
Yeah, it's a great mic, actually.
We'll see if it works.
Very impressed with the mic. Hi. Thank you for being in this panel. My name is Trig, by the way, from Washington, D.C. I'm from Accenture. So I have a question about whether you have done like assessments, like have you assessed your organizations or any other organization, figured out your objectives, your strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that. If you have done assessments, then I'd just like to know your roadmap for doing those.
Who wants it?
Well, I think the FinOps org offers a great maturity assessment on their website, and they'll help you with that, and it's great, and we've done it. It's great to line up what you're already doing with that roadmap so you can prioritize things to improve your maturity. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great idea, and I think it's a first step, especially if you're getting into FinOps, is to look at that maturity assessment that they have and map to their domains and capabilities that they present. It's a fantastic way to get there faster.
Thank you.
Who's over here somewhere?
I got a couple questions.
Front row. Come back to you next.
The magic box is very interesting. Max, you mentioned the incentives for your team, and I'm curious what kinds of incentives, and then also for for Jeff and Tiffany as well. Like, what else are you guys doing as far as incentives for your teams?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do this anymore, but we did have some pretty good financial incentives, which we phased out. I'll kind of tell you why. But basically, like, if you save a certain amount of money, you get a percentage of that back as a bonus.
Like the
Like, that's a
individual
very,
does?
very good incentive. Kind of the negative side to that, which we found, was the people finding the cloud costs issues were typically like infrastructure-focused people, so it wasn't very inclusive across the company. So, like the people closest to the infrastructure were getting the majority of the bonuses, which is not great. I mean, it's great for those folks, but like company-wide, it's not the best thing. And we also found that some of these incentives also went against like company OKRs or other goals where too much focus was on those things for individual reasons rather than like team goals and things like that. So it works great. Like from a high level, you'll save a ton of money, but you have to also think about some of these other possible problems.
So you're no longer doing the individual incentives. Are you kind of moving towards a cultural, just this is how we operate now, or are you incentivizing groups? Or?
Yeah. So we're not quite there yet. I think I mentioned that we have infrastructure teams inside some of these larger areas, so they now have goals for cost. So that's where we're seeing a lot of the kind of innovation within those areas. Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Front row.
Yeah. My questions are along the same lines.
Can you?
Oh.
There you go.
So how do you encourage your teams to be more efficient? Like, some of them say they don't have the time to upgrade databases, even though these databases will save us 30%, right? Or they don't have the time to terminate idle resources. They have other priorities. This could save us a lot of money. Like, what do you do to encourage these engineers to do the work?
Visibility is huge. Get leadership involved, leadership support. Those stakeholders can really help drive that action. But yeah, it can be tough if you don't have leadership backing or the support of the organization. But just making sure that there are dashboards out there showing everybody what's spending and what the trends are week to week and things like that can help.
I'll say from my perspective, exactly right. It all comes down to leadership. Right? It comes down to people. And then I'll let you answer, Tiffany. But I totally, like, as somebody who's had to hear this, you have to make it a priority, because if you don't, it starts to impact your workload. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a unique way of engaging my engineers at Instructure, in that we have an annual engineering conference where you can volunteer to do a presentation, and I do something called FinOps the Musical, and I set FinOps themes and topics that are relevant to us specifically to an artist this year I used Dolly Parton, and I tie the lyrics in and change them and everything. And this year I did something where I inducted people into the FinOps Hall of Fame. So I recognized people for FinOps work that they had done in the previous year. And it had an unintended consequence of making people really want that. They really want to get inducted into the FinOps Hall of Fame. And so I have had some crazy engagement with everybody across the organization that saw that presentation this year. And so I didn't intend to, but I incentivized them to engage with FinOps. So sometimes it works to go weird.
I had the pleasure of watching that, and it was fantastic. We have time for one more question before we are breaking. You're welcome to take your questions to the panelists in the lounge next door or out in the expo hall, but I will leave the box with you for the final question.
Hey, my name is Sergio from Evernorth.
Can you
Yep.
There you go.
All right. For Duolingo and Ticketmaster, I was wondering how you handle visibility with the multi-cloud strategy that you have.
Yeah, for multi-cloud, it's a little different. So the majority of our costs are in AWS, and then we use the other clouds for very specific purposes. We did try to do, long ago, we tried to spread our applications across, all the clouds. We're like, if AWS goes down, we'll fill over to GCP. Turns out that's really, really difficult. And we know this now, but this was kind of like the grand dream of everyone, like 5 years ago or so. And now I see this exact opposite trend. We're going to use what's good in each cloud. So it's kind of worked out where there are areas of the company that have this very specific application on this cloud, and then they handle like the majority of those costs. So we kind of avoid that having to go across. But we are bringing all the data into the same platform for visibility. It's just like the same people don't typically manage across all the clouds. Like I'm mostly AWS, and then we have like a data analytics and then like AI teams, and they manage like the individual kind of services.
Yeah, we'll say like most of the tools out there, the Cloud Abilities, Cloud Health, and there's tons of others, support multi-cloud cost and usage reports. One key for an organization though is like to have a common tagging or labeling strategy across those clouds so that you at least have, a common denominator that you can show, so you can show the costs in common dashboards and things for a specific tag and, assign it to the owners or division or whatever you want to map it to.
Common labeling and tagging strategy, the entire room's heads nodded.
It's big, it's huge.
Thank you very much, panelists. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
the
Thank
session.
you for attending and being here first thing in the morning. And thank you, Ticketmaster, Duolingo, and Instructure for joining me
Thank
on
you,
stage.
Spot.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.